Hello guys, welcome to my channel Best IT Solution, and today we'll discuss Spring Boot questions which are mostly asking in the interview. So Spring Boot interview questions we'll discuss in this tutorial. Okay, so these questions are often asked in the interview, and we'll discuss question with the answer. Okay, so first question is, what are the important features of Spring Boot? So important features of Spring Boot are like first, web development, Spring application, application occasions and listeners, and admin highlights, YML supports. Spring Boot also support YML file, and type-shape configurations. Okay, so these are the features which are provided by the Spring Boot, and another is externalized configuration, properties files. There are application properties files, and another one is YML file. So and another one is logging and security. So important features of Spring Boot are web development, Spring application, application occasions and listeners, admin highlights, YML support, type shape configuration, externalized configurations. The external configuration means we can give our configuration from external source, and properties files, logging and security. So what are the essentials components of Spring Boot? So the important components of Spring Boot are like Spring Boot starter. So these are the dependency bonds of dependency. So Spring Boot starter parent that's way, and another is Spring Boot auto configurations, Spring Boot actuator, and Spring Boot CLI. Okay, so these are the Spring Boot components. Spring Boot starter, Spring Boot auto configuration, Spring Boot actuator, and Spring Boot CLI command line interface. Our next question is, what is a Spring Boot actuator? So this question is mostly asked in this interview, that is, what is a Spring Boot actuator? So Spring Boot actuator allows you to monitor and manage your application when you want to push it for the productions. So Spring Boot actuator allows you to monitor and manage your application in the production level. When you are push our code to the production, in production we can monitor the application with the help of this actuator. So these are the endpoints. Okay, so it helps you to control your application by using the HTTP endpoints. So by using this HTTP endpoint, we can monitor the application. What is the primary difference between Spring and the Spring Boot? Okay, so Spring is a web application development framework based on Java. So generally, the Spring is a web application development framework. It's a lightweight framework based on Java. But Spring Boot is, on the other hand, Spring Boot is an extension of the Spring framework which eliminated the boilerplate configuration required for the startup, setup, and Spring application. So Spring is the application development framework, but Spring Boot is the extension to the Spring framework which eliminates the boilerplate configurations required for setup. So Spring Boot provides the auto configuration switch to the Spring framework, by which the developer need not to worry about the configurations. The Spring Boot configure the required things for the developer. Next question is, explain Spring Boot admin. So what is Spring Boot admin? So Spring Boot admin is a community project which helps you to manage and monitor your Spring Boot applications. So Spring Boot admin is a community project which helps you to manage and monitor your Spring Boot applications. Okay, how can you connect Spring Boot to the database using JPA? So Spring Boot supports Spring Boot data JPA starter. So this one dependency. Spring Boot supports Spring Boot starter data JPA, which helps you to connect Spring applications with the relational database RDBMS, relational database management system. So this Spring Boot starter JPA starter supports the Spring Boot data JPA starter helps to connect the Spring Boot application with the relational database. Where can you define properties in Spring Boot applications? So you can define properties of Spring Boot into a file called application.properties files. It helps you to create this file manually, or you can use Spring Initializer to create this file. So directly you can create this file using the Spring Initializer during the creation of project, or manually also we can create these properties files. More than one properties file also we can create, but nowadays also instead of properties files In different projects we are using also the YML files for the configurations. What are embedded containers supported by Spring? So Spring Boot supports the main three embedded containers, that is Tomcat, JT and Undertow. So these are the embedded containers supported by the Spring Boot. By default it uses the Tomcat. So Tomcat is by default used by the Spring Boot as an embedded container. What are the Spring Boot properties? So Spring Boot offers various properties which can be specified inside our project's application and properties files. It helps you to set values like a server port number, database connections, configuration, etc. So in this properties file we can define various values in the key value format. Okay. So we can mention the server port, database connections and database configurations. All these are mentioned in this properties file. This is called application.properties files. Next question is, what is the main difference between JPA and Hibernate? Okay. The main difference between both of them is that JPA is a specification or interface, whereas Hibernate is only a JPA implementation. So Hibernate is the ORM tool, object relational mapping tool, which implements the JPA. JPA is not a specification. What is a shutdown in the actuator? So a shutdown is an endpoint that helps application to be shut down properly. So shutdown is also an endpoint which helps the application to shut down properly. This features is not enabled by default. However, you can use it by setting commands management.endpoints.shutdown.enable equal true. So this features is not enabled by default, but we can manually enable it by mentioning this configurations like management.endpoint.shutdown.enable equal to true in our application.properties file. Is it possible to replace or override the embedded Tomcat server in Spring Boot? Yes, it's possible to replace the embedded Tomcat with only other servers, with any other servers by using the starter dependency. So first we need to remove the dependency of Tomcat, then we need to add the dependency of another server which we want to use. So for that you can use Spring Boot starter JT or as a dependency for according your need. So which server you want to add, we need to add that starter in our completed XML file. How do you add filter to an application? So there are three methods to add the filter in our Spring Boot applications. So by implementing filter interface, so there is a filter interface are in Spring provided. So we can implement that filter interface to add into filter. Another one is using filter registration bean. We can also use the filter registration bean in our Spring Boot main application, and also using the MVC controller. By using the MVC controller also we can use the filters or add the filters in our project. What are the Spring Boot starter projects? Starters in Spring Boot are a set of convenient descriptors that are included in Spring Boot applications. So starters in Spring Boot are a set of convenient descriptors that are included in the Spring Boot applications. It comes with a variety of Spring related technology which makes the entire process of the application development much easier. So it comes with a variety of Spring related technology. So the starters comes with the various Spring related technology which makes the entire process of the application development much easier. So starters makes our project development easier because starters are the combination of some bunch of dependencies only. What are the major difference between request mapping and get mapping? So this is also a very common questions which is most asked in interview. What is the difference between get mapping and request mapping? So request mapping can be used with a get, post, put and many other request methods using the method attribute on the annotation. Okay. So request mapping is generalized annotation. So if we using the request mapping, by we need to mention another attribute, method attribute in parameter, and we need to pass that which type of request mapping is it. So request mapping and the method type is get or post or put we can mention in the attribute. But the gate mapping is most specialized annotation, particularly for the GET request. Whereas gate mapping is only an extension of request mapping, which helps you to improve the clarity on request. That is that it is a GET request. How to create a Spring Boot project using Maven? So use any of the following methods to create a project. First, you can create project using the Spring Initializer. So spring.start.io, we can use create the project using Spring Initializer, or we can create the project by Spring Boot CLI command line interface, or directly we can create the Spring Boot project from the IDE by using the Spring Starter project wizard. Okay. What is live reload in Spring Boot? So live reload is a Spring Boot DevTools module. So live reload is a mechanism which is that includes live reload server to trigger a browser refresh when a resource is changed. So if we add the dependency Spring Boot DevTools, so this live reload features we can access, like it is trigger the server when the browser refresh when a resource is changed. When we are changing we made some change in our controller, so it is automatically refresh the server. Live reload server extensions are available freeware for Firefox, Chrome and Safari. So these browsers are available live reload server extensions. What are the major benefits of Spring externalized configurations? So externalized configuration helps to work with the same code in different environment. So externalized configuration helps to work with the same code in different environments. Developers can use YML files, properties files, command line arguments, and environment variables to externalize configuration. So developers can use the YML file we can use, or properties file we can use, or command line argument we can use, or environmental variables can use to give the externalized configuration. So if we are providing external configuration, we can use the same code in different environments. What do you mean by hot swapping in Spring Boot? So it is a way to reload the changes without restarting Tomcat or JT server. So without reloading the server, the changes different. This is called hot swapping in Spring Boot. So Eclipse and many other IDs support bytecode hot swapping. Eclipse and other IDs, so many IDs support the bytecode hot swapping. If you make any changes that don't affect the method signature, it should reload without side effect. So if we make any changes that don't affect the method signature, it will not affect the method signature. It should reload without the side effect. So this is called hot swapping. Explain auto configuration in Spring Boot. So auto configuration is used to configure Spring application automatically based on dependencies of class path parameter. So auto configuration means auto configuration used in Spring application automatically based on dependencies of class path parameter. So whatever the class parameters we have a dependency added in our class path, according to that the automatically configure the Spring Boot application. It makes development faster and easier. So this auto configuration features makes development faster and easier. Sorry. So what is the meaning of aspect oriented programming, AOP? So this is also important module of Spring framework. Aspect oriented programming supplements object oriented programming that aims to increase modularity. So aspect oriented programming also it is based on the object oriented programming that aims to increase modularity in our project. So AOP breaks programs logic into various parts. AOP breaks our program logic into various different small parts, which are called concerns. So define the ELK stack. So what is ELK stack? The ELK stack is made of 3 open source products. So this ELK stack is made of 3 open source products, that is Elasticsearch, Logstash and Kibana. So all these are the Elasticsearch. So it is a NoSQL database which is based on the open source search engine called Lucena. So Elasticsearch means this is a NoSQL database which is based on the open source search engine called as Lucena. and Logstas. So what is Logstas? It is a data processing pipeline tool. Logstas is a data processing pipeline tool which accepts inputs from sources, performs different transformations, and exports the data to the targets. Okay, so Logstas means it is a data processing pipeline tool. Logstas is a data processing pipeline tool which accepts inputs from the sources, which accepts the inputs from the sources, perform different transformations or operations on this data, and exports data to the targets and sends back data to the targets point. So this is the Logstas. And Kibana helps user to visualize data with graphs and chart in Elasticsearch. So this is the monitoring tool. Now Kibana helps users to visualize data with the graphs. So we can visualize the data in the form of graphs or charts in Elasticsearch. So explain CORS in Spring Boot. So CORS stands for cross origin. So CORS stands for cross origin resource sharing. So this is a mechanism implemented by browsers and helps users to authorize cross domain request. Okay. So CORS is a cross origin resource sharing is a mechanism which implemented by the browsers, which is implemented by the browsers and helps users to authorize cross domain requests. So it helps users to authorize cross domain requests. This mechanism serves as an alternative to less secure and less powerful hacks of the kinds of iframe or JSON-P. So this mechanism, this CORS mechanism serves as an alternative to less secure and less powerful hacks of the kinds of iframe or JSON. Explain different types of dependency injection. So there are two types of dependency injection in Spring Boot. We can found that's are constructor based dependency injection, and another is setter based. So constructor based dependency injection, it is a technique in which one class object supplies the dependency of another object. One class object supplies the dependency of the another object by using the constructor. And setter based dependency injection, it is a dependency injection in which the framework injects the primitive and string based values using setter method only. Okay. What are the advantages of microservices? So following are the major advantages of microservices are like it makes development fast and easy, compatible with all container, reduce production time. It is a lightweight model that supports a major business application. So it is also it will reduce the production time also. It is a lightweight model that supports a major business applications. Okay, so these are the microservices advantages. Explain the difference between an embedded container and a var. So the main difference between these two is embedded containers help you to run Spring Boot application as a jar from the command prompt without setting up any web server. So embedded containers help you to run Spring Boot application as a jar from the command prompt without setting up any web server. So without setting up any web server, you can directly run our Spring Boot application using as a jar. While to run a var you need to first set up the tomcat, but if you want to run a var file you need to first set up the tomcat as server. How can you set active profile in Spring Boot? So follow the following, there are following steps to set up the active profile. Pass this profile as an argument when you launch the Spring Boot application. So when we launch the Spring Boot application, we need to pass that profile as argument. Set active the active profile in application properties file. In application properties file, we need to mention the active properties and that which profile we want to active. Set active. That profile should be active. Okay. Explain what is MAVEN, how does it work. So MAVEN is a project management build tool. So it is a build tool, project build tool. It provides the developer a complete build lifecycle framework. Okay, so it is provides the developer a complete build lifecycle framework, that is it gives the ready-made project structure. On executing MAVEN commands, it will look for POM file in MAVEN. So POM is the project object model. So this is the main file in the MAVEN. It will run the command on the resources described in the POM. So all the configurations and dependencies are added in this POM file only. Why Maven plugin are used? So Maven plugins are used to create a jar file, create a war file, compile code files, unit testing of code, documenting of project, and reporting. So Maven plugins are there are different advantages of using the Maven plugin. So we can create a jar file by using Maven plugin. By we can create the war file also. We can compile our code by using Maven plugin. We can also write the test cases template using the Maven plugin. We can document the project also using Maven plugin. We can reporting also using the Maven plugin. List out the dependency scope in Maven. So there are various dependency scope in Maven are like compile, provided, runtime, and test, system, and import. So these are the various scope dependency scope of Maven. So compile, what is compile scope? It is the default scope and it indicates that dependency is available in the class path of the project. So compile means it is the default scope and it indicates that dependency is available in the class path of the project. So it is the default scope and it indicates that dependency is available in the class path of the project. And what is provided, it indicates that the dependency is provided by JDK or web server or container at runtime. So provided means it indicates that the dependency is provided by the JDK or web server or container at runtime. Another is runtime scope means this tells that the dependency is not needed for compilation but it's required during execution. So runtime scope means that this whatever dependency added that's not needed in compilation, that's executing, that's required during the execution of the program during the runtime. And test scope means it says dependency is available only for the test compilation and execution phase. During testing and compilation execution phase, during test cases these dependencies are needed. System means it indicates you have to provide the system path. System scope means it indicates you have to provide the system path. And another one is import. So this indicates that the identified or specified forms should be replaced with the dependencies in that forms sections. Import means this indicates that the identified or specified form should be replaced with the dependencies in the form sections. Okay. So these are the different scope of the Maven. Mention the difference between the Apache Ant and Maven. So Apache Ant and Maven. Ant is a toolbox. Maven is a framework. So difference is Apache Ant. It is a toolbox, but Maven is a build framework, build tool. It's a framework. Ant does not have formal conventions like project directory structure. Maven has conventions. So Ant does not have Apache Ant does not have formal conventions like project structures, project directory structures. But Maven has a particular conventions. It is a particular. It follows a particular project structures. Ant is procedural. You have to tell to compile, copy, and compress. So Apache Ant is procedural. You have to tell to Ant to compile, copy, and compress. Maven is declarative, but Maven is declarative information on what to make and how to build. Ant does not have life cycle. You have to add sequence of task manually. So Ant does not have the life cycle. We manually we need to add the sequence of task manually, but Maven has a life cycle. Another difference is Ant scripts are not reusable. Ant scripts are not reusable. You cannot reuse the Ant scripts. Maven plugins are reusable. You can reuse the Maven plugins. Next question is what is a bean factory? So these are the bean factory is the core of the Spring framework and it is the lightweight container. So bean factory and application context these are the container IOC container which loads bean definitions and manages your beans. So this bean factory here loads the bean definitions and manages our beans. Beans are configured using XML file and manage singleton defined beans. So these beans are configured using the XML file and also manage the singleton defined beans. It is also responsible for lifecycle methods and injects dependencies. So the beans factory also responsible for the lifecycle methods of beans and the inject dependencies also. So these are the main purpose of this bean factory container. It also removes ad hoc singletons and factories. So what is called Spring MVC? So a Spring MVC is a single shared controller instance, and it is used to handle the request type controller interceptor which run in the IOC container. So MVC is generally a model view controller. So there is a model means data, there is a view layer, this is a controller. So a Spring MVC is a single shared controller instance, and it is used to handle requests. This MVC used to handle the request interceptors which run the IFC container. It also allows multiple dispatcher servlets. It also allows the multiple dispatcher servlets which can share application context interface but not class-based interface. Name the various modules used in the Spring framework. So there are different modules are provided by the Spring framework like AOP, aspect oriented programming, JDBC, Java database connectivity, JDBC abstractions and DAO, data access object module, the core container module, MVC module view controller framework module, application context module, and OR mapping integration module, object relational mapping integration module, web module. Okay, so these are the modules which are provided by the Spring framework. The Spring module diagram. These are the diagrammatical representations of the different Spring modules which are provided by the Spring. That is Spring MVC, Spring Webflow, Spring Security, Spring Integration, Spring Web Server, Spring Data JPA, Spring Batch, Spring Social. Okay, so these are the different modules which is shown in diagram. State the difference between application context and the bean factory in Spring. So both are the container. Application context allows more than one configuration file to exist while bean factory only permits one. So these both are the container, but for the small projects we are using the bean factory, and for the large project we are using the application context. And application context allows more than one configuration file, while bean factory permits only one configuration file. Application context can print events to bean registered as listeners. This feature is not supported by the bean factory. So application context can print events to bean registered as listeners, but this feature is not supported by the bean factory. Application context also provides support for application of lifecycle events, internationalizations, messages and validation, and also provides services like EJB integration, that is Enterprise Java Bean integration, remoting, JNDI access and scheduling. Okay, so these features are not supported by the Bean factory. So some advanced features are there. So it is better to use application context instead of Bean factory. So how to start using Spring? So we have provided some steps to using the Spring. So download the Spring and its dependent file from the Spring sites. Create application context XML to define beans and its dependencies. Integration application context XML with web.xml. Deploy and run the applications. So what is IOC? This is also a most important question, which is most frequently asking in interview. What is IOC? Inversion of control. So IOC, inversion of control, is also known as dependency injections module. So IOC directs the programmers to depict how to create objects instead of actually creating them. So instead of creating the object manually by ourselves using the new keyword, IOC directs the programmer to create the objects. It is the responsibility of IOC to create the object, manage the objects, and manage the life cycle of the object also, from creation to destruction. But in this in this design pattern, this control has been given to the assembler, and assembler will instantiate required class if needed. What is a join point? So join point, the point where an aspect can be introduced in the application, is known as join point. So join point is the point where an aspect can be introduced to the application, is known as join point. So this point could be a field being modified, a method being called, or even an exception being thrown. So this point could be a field which is being modified, a method being called, or even an exception being thrown. So in various situations we can call that is joint point. At these points, the new aspects code can be added to introduce a new behavior to the applications. So at this joint point, the new aspects codes can be added to introduce a new behavior to the applications. Aspect code can be inserted at this point into normal flow of applications to change the current behavior. So this aspect code can be inserted at this point, this joint point, into normal flow of applications to change the current behavior. Describes about DAO in Spring Framework. So DAO, data access object, is used to provide integration of Java database connectivity and object relational mapping objects. So it is used to integrate the Java database connectivity and object relational mapping objects. DAO is Spring Framework provides connections for JDBC, Hibernate, JDO, JPA, and Common Client Interface and Oracle. So all for all these DAO provide the features. And the last question is, what is the metadata auto proxying? So metadata auto proxying can be performed in sparing which can be driven by the metadata. So metadata auto proxying can be performed in sparing which can be driven by the metadata. This is determined by source level attributes and keeps metadata inside the source code. So this is determined by source level attributes and keeps metadata inside the source code. So this maintains metadata in one place and mainly used for declarative transaction support. So this maintains metadata in one place. So this maintains metadata in one place and mainly used for declarative transaction support. This maintains metadata in one place and mainly used for the declarative transaction support. Okay, so this is the metadata auto. This is metadata auto proxy. Okay, so thanks for watching, and this is all about the thing boot interview questions. Okay, so thank you guys, and if you got some idea or knowledge from this video, please like and share the video with your friends, and please subscribe the channel. Thank you.